Good evening and welcome to EmpowerU. I'm Betty Overstreet, the Community Relations Director. I want to apologize for the late start. We were having a few technical difficulties, so hopefully the rest of the evening will go just fine. For those of you that may be here for the first time tonight, EmpowerU began in 2011 and was founded by Dan Reginald, who is also the founder and CEO of Frame USA. Dan's vision was to present classes on a diverse number of topics meant to engage, enjoy, and to educate. Also to empower you, because hopefully you're going to learn something you didn't know before. Most of our classes are live streamed, so I just want you to know 1 or 2 days after our class, you can find it online if you want to go back and watch it again. Or if you know someone that couldn't make it to a class that wants to watch it, they can go online and watch it. We also welcome feedbacks, comments, and suggestions for new classes. You can do that by going to info@empoweruohio.org. Since we are a nonprofit organization, towards the end of our classes, we do pass around buckets for any donations that you might wish to give to help keep us running. Also, our speakers will be taking questions tonight. If you have a question, please raise your hand and wait for me to bring a microphone to you so that everyone in the studio can hear your question, but also more importantly, so those online can hear your question as well. Next, you got a red ticket when you came in the door for a door prize. So Bill, would you bring the bucket up here? We'll let one of our guests choose a ticket. $039. Congratulations. We're giving away tonight The Coddling of the American Mind. I've been told it's a very good book, so you might want to give us a book report some night. And what is your name? Bob. Bob, congratulations. Next, I'd like to have Joe Platt, who's one of our board members, come up and make a couple introductions for us.
Thank you. Good evening. First off, we're just going to have just a quick kind of overview. We've been asked to do a little overview on issue 1. And for that, we have Judge Curt Hartman, who will just do a quick presentation overview. I'd say that with Judge Hartman currently is, let me just give you a little background on Judge Hartman. He is actually from Cincinnati. He graduated distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1987. He had subsequent service in the Navy as a nuclear trained officer aboard a fast attack submarine. He graduated from Vanderbilt Law School. Hartman has worked as a litigator at Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister. Before starting his own practice, he was appointed to the bench just recently, the Common Pleas bench, and after 15 years of operating his own law firm, and he's currently seeking re-election. And we're actually fortunate too, because we have Charles Miller, who's also a Hamilton County Common Pleas Court of Appeals judge, excuse me. So anything that Mr. Hartman has to say that you disagree with, we can have that appealed to the Court of Appeals. So with no further ado, we'll have Mr. Hartman come up. Judge Hartman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. And this is kind of a reunion for me because when I had my own practice, I did a lot of open meetings, public records type thing, and had the opportunity to do several presentations for EmpowerU through the years. And so I know it's a great organization, and Dan and people who support him have been a great asset to the community. Don't want to take too much time away from our main speaker tonight, but I did want to get out and kind of educate people on issue 1. Which is a proposed constitutional amendment to the Ohio Constitution appearing on the ballot here in November. And those who might have heard stuff about issue 1 have heard, well, it's to reform the drug laws and it's to make them more fair and that we're not sending people to prison and trying to get them more into treatment. I would say that's maybe half the story or even a quarter of the story. I think, the devil's sometimes in the details. And if you look at issue 1, I've handed out a 2-page handout, and we're going to make this also available online to those people who are watching over the internet. Gives kind of a summary of kind of misperceptions or misinformation that might be going on out there on issue 1. To state it summarily, issue 1 has actually 4 main changes that it is looking to make to Ohio law. And again, this is being done in the Constitution. First thing it does is it would make drug possessions all misdemeanors. Currently, drug possessions are generally felony offenses. Felonies are the 4th degree or 5th degree, 5th degree being the lowest offense. But it would make most drug possessions misdemeanors. That includes serious drugs beyond heroin like fentanyl. Fentanyl is a very deadly and dangerous drug. 19 grams, which is a small amount, can kill 10,000 people. And if issue 1 passes, that will become a misdemeanor, where the maximum sentence could be 180 days in jail. But again, and I'm going to get to a few of these points, that won't even happen on the first or second offense of the person having possession of fentanyl. The second thing it does is it would prohibit a judge from incarcerating a person for any drug offense unless that person has been convicted 3 times for a drug offense within a 24-month period. So again, it's going to reduce drug offenses to misdemeanors, maximum 180 days in jail, and that 180 days in jail can't even be imposed unless the person has been convicted 3 times for committing that drug offense. So the question is, what are they doing to themselves? What threat do they represent to society after that first offense, after that second offense? The third thing that it does is it will actually limit the ability of a judge to send anybody to prison for a probation violation. And that's not just for drug offenses, it is for any offense. So even felonies, 1st degree felonies, 2nd degree felonies. So if, as a common pleas judge, I handle the felony offenses. If I place somebody on probation and they violate, they don't report to their probation officer, I put them on electronic monitoring, they cut the electronic monitoring off and just abscond. They make contact with the victim of their offense. Part of the condition of probation is do not have contact with your victim. If they do any of those violations, I can send, if they violate, I can now send them to prison. And that's a threat that we have against them to try to modify and keep the behavior corrective. If issue 1 passes, any of those type of violations, I will not be able to send them to prison. The only way a judge could send somebody to prison for a probation violation is if and only when they commit another crime. And so in certain senses, it's going to impact sentencing on like a 3rd degree felony. There's no presumption to send them to prison. There's no presumption to keep them in prison. If you want to give them a break and kind of say, maybe I think you might be able to work out on probation, but I'm going to put you on a short leash. The only leash now I would have under issue 1 is don't commit another crime. They could do whatever they want and they would know they're not going to prison. It doesn't help control and direct the behavior. The fourth thing that issue 1 does is it does modify prison terms that it gives up to 25% credit for them participating in various programs while in prison, which is commendable to get them in programs. But that 25% credit applies to currently incarcerated people for any crimes that they commit, 1st degree felonies, 2nd degree felonies, etc. So those 4 main things, only really the first 2 deal with drug-related offenses, lowering them all to misdemeanors and then limiting when you can even incarcerate them. I will say this, part of the argument on issue 1, for issue 1, is that we need to get people into treatment, that it's really an addiction and we need to take care of that problem, especially for those who are simply possessing. And the reason they're possessing is because they are addicted. I'm hard pressed to tell you of any judge that is sending people to prison presently for drug offenses, for drug possession. We work with them. We try to work with them. It's almost impossible. They have to work hard to go to prison. And so I've had people who come with me with 4 or 5 violations on probation when they're drug possessions. I still don't send them to prison. I'm working with them because people will relapse during their rehabilitation. And the thing that happens, with felony offenses, we can place them on probation for up to 5 years and hold anywhere from 12 to 18 months over their head of potential prison, which creates a certain incentive for them to get in the program, stay in the program, follow up with that treatment. If everything becomes a misdemeanor, the maximum that the judge can give them is 180 days. And that would include time at a residential treatment program. And after 180 days, they're done, they're gone, no more control. And the indications are that is not really good enough time, a sufficient enough time for rehabilitation. It is a long process. It is a discipline process, and people do relapse. We accept that. The other thing to say, you look, one of the things they want to say is, oh, we're going to save all this money by not sending drug possessors to prison, and we're going to mandate that all this money goes to treatment programs. The problem that's going to be, you can build up a great treatment program, but if you don't have the means, you don't have the incentive, the stick, if you will, carry on a stick, if you don't have the stick to get them into that treatment program and have them committed and work with that treatment program and follow up, those treatment programs are going to be empty. You can build them all up, but unless you can get the people, you create the incentive. And that's really the concern I have. I think, my one concern that I think is dangerous is 180 days. If you lock somebody up for 180 days for a drug offense, their body's going to reduce their tolerance on it. And that happens. But I really do not believe that is sufficient enough time to really turn the corner for them. People don't change their addiction overnight. They don't have this epiphany and suddenly say, I'm changing, I'm going that direction. It's a slow, drawn out process. But if you withdraw them for 180 days and then they get released, because after 180 days as a misdemeanor, courts are done with them. You release them at that time and they go back to using, you've increased the risk of an overdose. Because if they go back to using the same level of drugs that they were using before, their body will not tolerate it. It will lend to more potential for an overdose. And so I think the bottom thing here says, you got to recognize, one, you better agree 100% with 100% of the text as written. Because this is going into the Constitution. If this passes, this becomes part of the Constitution. And the final point I would leave with you on that is, I do not know of any law that is a major change of law that has ever been written and implemented the way it was intended. You always, on major laws, have to come back and revisit it. You have to massage it. You have to modify it because the law of unintended consequences. But this is going to be in the Ohio Constitution, which means the only way it could be modified when it doesn't always work 100% the way it's been advertised. The only way you can change it is to go back to the Constitution, which is a long, drawn-out process. The legislature will not be in a position to correct the law of unintended consequences that is inevitable in any piece of legislation. So I'll give this information to you, read through it, do more research. I encourage you to research, talk to your friends and neighbors upon it. We do have a few questions here. We got a question here.
I was wondering how this issue got on the ballot, who backed it, and usually when it becomes a part of the Constitution, doesn't it require a petition to go around and a lot of signatures?
To answer your second question first, yes, it does, and it was proposed by initiative petition. A sufficient number of signatures, valid signatures were obtained by doing so. But then it gets to your first question. Well, who's behind this? Who's pushing this? It is coming out of California, and specifically it's coming from George Soros and Mark Zuckerberg. They are putting their millions and millions of their billions of dollars into trying to tell Ohioans that we need to change our drug laws and make them very lax. We need to just basically keep everybody on probation. Don't give you the ability as a judge to exercise your discretion. And so the money behind the petition effort was Zuckerberg and Soros. The money behind this effort on the ballot is Zuckerberg and Soros. And that, that's, I think, it is what it is, and that's the source, but let's recognize it. The bottom line, like I was saying, though, it doesn't allow the judges to exercise the discretion. Each person that comes before us for sentencing on any offense, but especially a drug offense, we got to look at that person, their background, their history, their family support. All those things go into the calculus as to what's best for them to help get them on that right path. This is kind of becomes a one size fits all, and it doesn't have the hammer or the stick that we really need to help encourage that. And again, we don't send them to prison on these type of offenses. We want to work with them, but I'm concerned that that will go away. Go down here.
Judge Hartman, can a judge sentence an individual charged with drug possession? Can they be sentenced to a treatment program?
The answer is yes, and that is what happens now. We don't send them to prison. We have both residential, where they are in a lockdown facility for up to 180 days, 6 months. It's a River City program. It's over in Camp Washington. That is an inpatient treatment program that we can use, and I use regularly. There's the Talbert House for some outpatient programs, Prospect House, another outpatient program over on Price Hill. So we have treatment programs. We're using those programs. You know, the misperception is that we're sending all these drug possessors to prison. We're not. We want to get them in these programs. We want to get to the foundational issue that is causing the addiction and help them turn the corner and start that long process.
I was confused because I heard you say that an incentive was needed for an individual to seek a drug treatment program, but the incentive would be the judge's sentence.
Correct, and the prospects of prison. I mean, 180 days, I think most drug addicted people will say they could do that and tolerate that and just move on and get back into their old ways. It's not enough time to really turn them around and help them in that right direction. Because again, people don't have this epiphany and suddenly go cold turkey. You know, the opioids addiction is horrible and it doesn't change. It's not a cold turkey type addiction to break. And so working with them, trying to give them that incentive. I mean, I'll be honest with you, sending somebody to prison for a drug offense is an easy way out. You send them to prison, you're over and done with them. You don't have to worry about them. They're off probation. They're the prison's problem. They get released. But at the end of the day, have they been proved and has society been better for that course? And the answer is generally no. The better course is to get them in programs, work with them. And so I've actually had people in my courtroom who've said, send me to prison. I'll just do my time. I'll do my 12 months. I'll get me out. I said, no, that's too easy. We're going to keep control of you. We're going to work with you on these programs. And I can tell you one guy in particular I know has been very successful. He relapsed a couple times during the process. I could have sent him to prison for 12 months and been done with him. But because of, you know, taking that patience and not giving him the easy out, I think he's better, his family better. He's actually, he was separated from his family at the time. He's now reunited with his family and his 2 daughters. Things are improving. It's not perfect, but it's working that way for him particularly. And so I think that's a good part, that we have that discretion. Why don't we go one more?
Just one more question.
Okay, how is the media basically treating this issue that you've seen, like the newspapers? And secondly, how is the trial lawyers treating this issue?
Newspapers and news media generally, from my perspective, I've not seen much out there. Now, granted, I've been in the middle of my own campaign, so I'm not watching TV much and not reading, not seeing the news media that much. Aaron might be able to answer that a little bit better on the news media. Trial lawyers, I think you ask the attorneys who actually are in the courtrooms on a daily basis, who are representing the drug addicted people and who come before us, they recognize how we operate in our courtrooms, at least my courtroom. And it's trying to deal with them, trying to get them on that right direction. And those who actually are in the courtroom, at the ground level, recognize the good that's going on today, and that this massive change is not needed. It's a massive change of the law on multiple fronts. It's not simply drug reform. There's a lot more on that, a lot more criminal reforms that's going to tie to the hands of the judges, not give us the discretion that we need to deal with people on an individual basis. So got that handout, read through it. Again, we're going to make it available online for those watching. Do more research on the internet. I've done some on myself and saw that there's more Q&A stuff out there, but become educated and really get into it, because it is a very significant thing. And again, it's in the Constitution. So when things don't work as they plan, there's no way to correct it but to go through that whole constitutional process again. So I thank you for your time, for your consideration. Joe, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Curt. Looking to our Court of Appeals Justice here, Charles Miller, with no facts or facts of law an issue here. We're clear to go, I guess. Okay. The Court of Appeals says we're good to go. I will say that we're very fortunate. Thank you very much both to Judge Hartman and to Judge Charles Miller for being here, and again for your participation on being accessible to the community. Thank you so much. Our next guest and our main topic tonight is on school choice, and our guest is Aaron Baer. Aaron has actually worked in a number of fields. He had a startup, a technology startup. He worked for one of the, in Arizona, for one of the nation's premier policy councils, the Center for Arizona Policy. He also had a position with the Attorney General in Arizona. Aaron's appeared at different venues, including CNN, NBC Nightly News, and he's been published in Cincinnati Enquirer, USA Today, and the Arizona Republic. Currently, Aaron Baer is serving as president of the Citizens for Community Values, and is spearheading one of the folks spearheading the school choice movement here in Cincinnati. Aaron?
Joe? I'm good here. I got the wireless mic here. It is a true pleasure to be here with you tonight. I'm so grateful for what you're doing at EmpowerU. If we had EmpowerU in every city all over the state, we'd be much better off. Grateful for Dan and for you all hosting me. Really grateful for Joe. Joe actually serves on my board at CCV, and he's done more good for Cincinnati and for Ohio generally than I think most people will know. And Joe actually, when he was inviting me for the event tonight, he gave me a call and said, "Hey, Aaron, do you believe in free speech?" And I said, "Well, yeah, Joe, I believe in free speech." He said, "Good, why don't you come give one and come talk with us tonight about school choice?" So I was thrilled to be here with you. I want to just point out a couple things just to wrap up on issue one. To answer your question on the media, the Plain Dealer has already come out and opposed issue one, which is one of the more liberal papers in the state. I think you're going to see a lot of news papers come out and oppose issue one, just because it's so terribly written, and to put something like this in the state constitution, I think most people across the aisle could look at something like this and say, "Hey, this is a bad idea." I will point out, if you guys want more information on issue one, I think Judge Hartman's handout, it's great. I have in the back more voter guides that CCV puts out, and the back page of that voter guide, it covers all the statewide races, all the congressional races. The back page has a big no on issue one ad that talks about all the issues with it. And you can grab those, they're free. If you want some to give out to your church, this is a resource that 501c3 organizations, churches can distribute, and you can grab those on your way out, and we can provide those for you. So I'll leave that there. I'll answer some more questions afterwards as we dive in here on the school choice issue. Hey, Jay, let's go ahead and you can, for the online folks, you can fire up the PowerPoint. I am thrilled to be talking to you about school choice. This is actually when Joe asked me to come and talk about school choice, I was really excited because this is an issue I'm passionate about. This is an issue I think a lot of folks aren't so keyed into and don't understand the depth of it. We talk a lot about issues that impact our culture, issues that impact our state and the direction. I think very few issues we discuss, though, have the profound impact on the future of our state and nation as school choice. And as I hope that by the night's end, you'll have a good appreciation for that. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive. You guys are called EmpowerU, so I'm jumping into the 201 level stuff here, so that when you leave tonight, you'll have a good feel for what Ohio's state is on school choice, where we need to be going as a state, and how that will really impact the state for good. So the title of our presentation tonight is "One Size Doesn't Fit All," and this is sort of the overarching principle behind school choice. If our education system is about students, not about districts, not about teachers, not about employment, not about anything else, it's about about educating and equipping students to be functional and contributing members of society, we need to recognize that every child is unique, every child is different, and to have a one-size-fits-all model when it comes to education just doesn't make sense. So for CCV, for those of you who aren't familiar with Citizens for Community Values, we've been around Ohio for 35 years, primarily in Southwest Ohio. We're sort of in our home right now here in Cincinnati. Today, we've actually are based in Columbus. We're about 2 blocks from the State House, and we primarily work down there on life, marriage and family, religious freedom issues. Under the family issue, we've started working on school choice, and our stance on school choice is pretty simple. We're not anti-public school. I went to public school. I went to Warren G. Harding High School. I thought I ran into an Elder grad earlier today, and I was pretty upset with them because they beat us in the state championship football game in 2004. But we're not, at CCV, we are not anti-public school. And I think most organizations that advocate for school choice, you're not going to find a single one, you're not going to find most of them that don't like public schools and don't see public schools as a necessity. We need good public schools, but we also need other types of schools that can help provide children options that the public schools might not be able to. Now, every public school is not going to be able to meet every child's needs. And that's why we say we're pro-public, we're pro-charter, we're pro-private, we're pro-home education, and we're pro-online academies. We support all of these different options, and what we see is the more competition, the more diversity we have in the education space, the better off we'll be, and the more we'll be able to provide for every child, and that's the case we're going to make here today. So, little rundown of where we're going to be going. I'm going to start us off on just sort of broad principles of why school choice. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. I'm going to then jump into a little bit of a deep dive on Ohio's educational options. We're going to talk about how we fund schools in Ohio. We're going to talk about what our options are. What options does a family today, a family like mine, I've got a 2.5-year-old at home. I've got one on the way. We're going to be looking at how are we going to educate my daughters and what are our options to look at today. We're going to also look at what kind of private school vouchers we have. We have 5 different scholarship programs for families today. And then I'm going to get into what's the ideal. What do we need to be moving to? And then we're going to take some questions. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in a little bit of time. Hold on. If you have questions, we'll take them at the end. And so please be thinking of those questions. I might even stop along the way to see if you guys have questions as we're working through. So let's jump first into why school choice. This is, for those of you who can't see the chart very clearly, I'm going to cite a few different resources here. These are all from the Heritage Foundation. I think they're some of the ones that have the great resources available today. And what this map what this chart shows here is basically since the 1960s and since the 1960s to today, both math and reading scores in America generally have been flatline. We're looking a little bit of variation up and down, a little bit of, a little bit improvements and downturns, but overall relatively flatline. And what you see here, those 3 lines, for those of you who can't see the map, the top line in those first 2 charts, the top line is for sort of high schoolers, the middle line is middle schoolers, and the bottom line is elementary school. So you can see, like in math, we've improved math scores for elementary schools since the 1960s, but overall, you'll see that at the end of the day, for kids who are graduating, it's a pretty flat result. Well, meanwhile, since the 1960s, since 1969 really, we've more than tripled the amount of money we're spending, adjusted for inflation, on education. I mean, this is maybe not quite tripled, it's gone up by almost more than doubled on education. Now, for any of you who run a business, I mean, we're sitting in a business right now, tell me if you would ever be able to get away with same results when you've more than doubled your amount of money you spent on it. No business could survive that way. Nothing could survive that way. But our education system, we're constantly putting more money into it, but for some reason our results aren't improving. And this is why, quite honestly, most of the time when I hear the conversation around education and I hear it's a funding issue, I have a hard time believing that it's a funding issue, because we're putting a lot of money into education today. If you look all told, and I'll get into this a little bit later, if you look all told at what we're putting in Columbus City schools today, it's about $20,000 per student. You're telling me that we can't educate kids in Columbus City schools at $20,000 a pop? That seems pretty ludicrous. This next one is when we're looking at, so we're spending all that money in schools. Where is it going? I think this chart is pretty revelatory about where we're spending this money. This is the school staffing spikes despite flatline in student enrollment. So while we are spending a lot more in education and results are being the same, where's that money going? Well, it's going to hire faculty and staff for schools, and not teachers necessarily. This top line here, the one where you see the biggest growth, that's non-teaching staff. This line right here is total staff. The bottom line here is teaching staff. This line here across the bottom, this is actual student enrollment. So while student enrollment has only grown by 9%, total staff has grown by 83%. Non-teaching staff has grown by 133%. So we're spending a whole lot more on education. It looks like most of it's not actually going into the classroom, and results aren't going up. So this is where we get to about why, one of the fundamental core reasons, I think, especially for conservatives, we need to believe in school choice, is that This can't happen in a competitive environment. The bottom line right now is on public school education, there are no downward pressures on costs. They're allowed to basically spend into oblivion, and there's no pressure for them to actually perform better because the kids are trapped in those schools. They can't go anywhere. And we'll have people will say things, well, we have open enrollment in Ohio and we have private schools in Ohio. Yeah, but if a kid can't afford to go to that school, they don't have access to that school. If the school's not anywhere in their neighborhood, they don't, there might be Cincinnati Christian schools or some Mars Hill Academy. We might have those schools in here, but if a kid can't get transportation there or can't afford the tuition there, that's not an option for them. So for these schools, there's no competitive forces where a parent's able to say, hey, listen, you're not performing well, so I'm going to pull my kid out and send them someplace else, and you're not going to get the money for my kid. It's basic market principles here on why our education system spending continues to skyrocket, but outcomes are pretty flatline. And again, this is from a Heritage Foundation report in 2015. There we go. So, but the bottom line, like I said, though, when we talk about school choice, it's really easy to get into the economics of it. It's really easy to get into sort of the free market principles that are lacking in education today. But we really miss the boat if we don't keep the focus on the kids. And this is when we're going to start talking here in just a minute about how we fund education in Ohio. And the bottom line is right now in Ohio, we fund school districts. We don't fund students. And we need to move to a model where we're funding students instead of school districts, because that's what's going to bring the competition in the space. That's going to provide the options for all different students. Again, I think about, I'm in a Bible with a guy who is an incredibly successful business guy. He owns a car repair shop that's just growing like crazy, multi-millions in revenue, that kind of thing. He almost dropped out of high school because every high school class he was in was college prep. Came from a great family, but he loved working with his hands. He didn't want to be in a college prep class, but in his public school, that was the only option for him, was college prep. And there might be some technical training options out there, but you have to get into those programs oftentimes in 9th grade. And if you don't get into it right then, you don't have an opportunity to go to it later. There's all of these different mitigating factors. So he was incredibly depressed in high school, just thought he was useless because he was getting bad grades. But the school wasn't teaching him the way he needed to be taught, and it wasn't giving him the opportunity to use his natural gifts, which were the gifts with his hands and entrepreneurial. He didn't need to take trigonometry. He was never going to use that. He didn't need to take biology, advanced biology classes. That wasn't anything that he was going to ever use. He wanted to work with his hands, and the public schools didn't provide him that outlet to be able to do that. So this is the biggest principle when we're talking about school choice, is it needs to come back to the kids. It needs to come back to what is best for that individual child. So let's talk about Ohio today. What does the landscape look like in Ohio when we're actually talking about where are we educating kids today? And the bottom line is nearly 90% of kids in Ohio are going to public schools today. Now, keep in mind, when I talk public, that includes charter schools. Charter schools are actually public schools. They have less regulation, and therefore they also get less funding, all of these types of things, but they are public schools. So about 90% of all students in Ohio go to public schools. You've got another about 9% that go to private, and 2% that are home educated. This is one of the reasons why, again, where I say, especially for those people who are staunch school choice advocates, I say we have got to be pro-public school, because at the end of the day, the vast majority of kids are always going to be educated in the public schools. So that's why we need to advocate for better schools and advocate for improvement in these schools, because no matter what, we're never going to change that. But we can provide more kids more options. So I'm going to just talk about some of the difference here of what we have with public schools. Public schools have open enrollment. Basically, we all know this. Kids are assigned to schools based on their address. And charter schools are considered public schools or community schools. Again, it doesn't make much sense that a child is basically trapped in a school because of what his zip code is. That a child doesn't have access to a better education because of his zip code or his parents' income, that he can't get to the education that he needs. This is the fundamental message of the school choice movement. So what are these charter schools under there? The key difference with charter schools is that they're independently operated. So this is just the bottom line, is they don't have a lot of the bureaucracy that you see in public schools. They don't have that sort of top layer of non-teaching staff in public schools. They have a lot more flexibility with curriculum, with scheduling, with staffing, with learning environments. They can do online academies, but they get less funding because of that. They get less state funding because of that. And this is one of the core issues with charter schools that we see today. Jay, I want to play this short video here. This is a video that the Fordham Institute produced that I think is phenomenal. It does a great job of explaining how schools are funded in Ohio today and why public schools and charter schools are often at odds with one another. Now, just keep in mind when you're watching this, the bottom line with this is that in Ohio today, we are funding districts, we're not funding students. And that's why we have such a problem with this. Jay, go ahead and fire that video up. Probably going to open up a browser. There we go.
It's also under investments. Ohioans contribute more than $11,000 per student on average through state and local taxes. Unfortunately, Ohio's school funding system is also pretty complicated. That's led to confusion and controversy, especially around charter schools. Some people say that charter schools receive more funding than district schools, while others say that charters receive less, which is true. And why is there such disagreement? Let's take a look at how school funding works, starting with districts. Each district levies at least a 2% property tax. In welcoming districts, this raises more dollars. Districts then report to the state how many students live in the district. This number includes students attending district and charter schools. The state puts this enrollment information along with data on property values and resident income into a detailed funding formula. The state allocates additional money based on the needs of students to ensure adequate funding for every child to receive a quality education. Districts receive more state aid for their disadvantaged students. Finally, districts have the option to pass additional tax levies to raise even more money. They also receive some money from the federal government. Hey, we won't do what's complicated. Now let's look at charter funding. Charter schools can't assess local property taxes and are funded entirely through the state funding formula. They receive a base amount of funding and, like district schools, additional resources for students who need extra support. Charters also receive federal funds. When adding state and local revenue together, charters receive about 1/3 less on average, even though sometimes they receive more state dollars per pupil. The source of the confusion comes from Ohio's complex formula and the manner in which charter funding flows through districts. Remember, charter students are included in district student counts, even though they don't attend school there. So when the state calculates the amount of state aid the districts receive, it includes funds for both district and charter students. Because charter schools can't generate local property tax funds, the full cost of funding their students is subtracted from the district's state funds. None of the local revenue follows charter students and is left behind at the district. This funding mechanism leaves districts frustrated that charters often receive more state dollars per pupil, while charter schools are frustrated to receive less overall in per student funding. Ohio's school funding system is complicated and makes districts and charters feel at odds with one another. It's time for a change. Ohio needs a simpler and fairer funding that gives all students the opportunity to receive an excellent education.
So is your head spinning a little bit after that? That's kind of how, when I talk about our complex funding system, I think that does a great job of showing that. Hey, Jay, if you can flip back over to my PowerPoint presentation, especially before whatever that next video comes up. I can't endorse whatever that next video is. You might want to even close out the browser. So So this is where we talk about right now we're funding districts, and we're actually, as that video shows, and again, I can't give the Thomas Fordham Institute enough credit for putting that together, because that's about as simply as we can explain the funding mechanisms, how we fund education in Ohio in that video, without getting into just the ridiculousness of the complex formula. Instead of the basics of, you have this child, therefore we are sending this much money. Now again, no state does directly like that, but that's the overall principle that many states that we see a thriving school choice environment stemming in or growing in will do. And fundamentally, the way we have school choice programs structured in Ohio right now, you can see how it puts charter school and public schools at odds with one another, and they're fighting and they're fighting over dollars, over competing with each other to see who can educate children best and provide the best educational environment for kids to go to. This is why one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of the top flight charter schools coming to Ohio. You know, when you look at the rankings of top public schools in the nation, many of those top public schools are charter schools. But based off of the way that we fund education in Ohio, and based off of the way that charter schools need to get their money from the districts, and also because they can't get any of the local money that comes in, those top flight charter schools will not come to Ohio because they can't afford it. It's not economically feasible for them. So this is a major issue we have in Ohio today. And quite honestly, until we deal with this core issue, we're not going to be able to really grow the robust school choice environment that we need. So let's actually talk about what are some of the school choice options we have today in Ohio. Actually, and before I move on to getting into private schools and the scholarship and voucher programs we have there, are there any questions about the funding mechanism? And I'll give more opportunities for questions later on. Any questions about any of that? Yes, sir.
Just a second.
One sec for the microphone.
Simple question is, you mentioned about open enrollment. What is that all about?
So open enrollment, good question. My apologies for throwing terms out there. Open enrollment is where a child can attend any school district, any public school district, regardless of their area. So if just because you live in Cincinnati Public School District doesn't mean you can't go to another public school district. Now in Ohio, we do have some open enrollment. A district can decide to be an open enrollment school district and say, you can come to our school as long, no matter where you live. If you're an Ohio resident, you can come to our school. However, not every school allows for open enrollment, which quite honestly, I think is a negative thing. It is state dollars going in there. We should have open enrollment, but that's for many students is their only option for school choice, is if they live in a school district and by some chance the other school districts around them have open enrollment. That's a very serious issue. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, for open enrollment, or from your earlier presentation, I believe you were talking about each school district receives funding based on basically numbers, how many people in each seat, how many students. So, for example, if Cincinnati Schools has open enrollment, I'm just tossing out a number. Say they have 25 students come in for open enrollment to Cincinnati Schools this school year. Does the state then give them money for 25 more students?
Yes. So that would be how that works. Now again, what our issue would be though is that they do get right now school funding, public school funding is somewhat based on enrollment, but not totally based on enrollment. There's all these other, as you saw, all of these other complex calculations that go into it in terms of income of the resident income, and there's a lot of other factors that go into that. It would be a lot cleaner and a lot better way of funding education, and I'll get into this as we start talking about sort of the ideal school choice programs. You'll understand why it's a lot better of an environment to fund students directly as we get into that. It's a lot cleaner if we do more direct funding of students. One more question here and then we'll keep moving on. Oh, hang on one sec for the microphone there so the folks online can hear you.
One thing I wondered about was Common Core and charter schools and private schools. Do they still have to follow that curriculum?
So this is a great point about school choice, and one of the things I'm gonna talk a little bit about an initiative we run at CCV called the Ohio Christian Education Network. a key component of private education that we're big advocates for is we don't want strings attached to voucher programs or ESAs or scholarship programs that allow students to get state money to go to a private school, for example. Because we want to allow those private schools to stay private, stay genuinely different than the public schools. And you know, the bottom line is, if we don't really have school choice, if we have a lot of requirements on private schools and charter schools that make them say, hey, you have to teach the exact same curriculum as the public schools. Basically, all we're doing is replicating the public schools again and again and again and not creating that competitive environment. You know, quite honestly, Common Core is a great example why we need school choice, because even though we've been able to stop Common Core to some extent, it's still in Ohio. It's not growing like it was about 5 years ago, but it's still here. And we need to be able to give parents options to say, hey, I don't like what you're teaching here. I'm going to send my kid elsewhere. That's quite honestly, from my perspective, if we really want to stop all of Common Core, we need school choice so that schools are disincentivized from teaching really terrible curriculum. I'm going to get in trouble for that. Curriculum that's not the best, we should say. I know some people think there's some good parts of Common Core. I think overall it's been a disaster, and it's just a bad idea of having top-down curriculum from the federal government. So let's dive into private schools, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what our scholarship and voucher programs are for schools today, for families today to access, to be able to go to private schools. Again, when I talk about access for private schools, it's not just the existence of a private school there, it's having the financial capability of being able to send your kid to that school. And if the purpose of our education funding system is to be able to create equipped and educated students to be able to be contributing members of society, we should want to be able to send those kids to whatever educational option that will equip them to go out and do that. So private schools. We have two different types in Ohio. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. You have chartered and non-chartered public schools. The bottom line is a chartered public school, a child can, the biggest difference is that at a chartered public school, a child can take a voucher or a scholarship from the state and be able to go to that school. So there's a little bit more regulation on those private schools. A non-chartered, non-public private school, that school is pretty much, they're off the grid. Now, they're still obviously registered with the Ohio Department of Education. They still have requirements of hours that students need to go through in educational environments in order to graduate and get a high school diploma. But they have much less regulation, much less flexibility. But the families who send their kids there cannot access vouchers or scholarships. We have 5 different scholarship programs in Ohio right now. And a lot of them, well, they're all kind of based at different types of subsection of students. This is one of the big problems we have in Ohio with vouchers or scholarships right now, is that it's a hodgepodge of different programs. So we have this Cleveland scholarship programs, which provides about $4,600 for students in K-8, $6,000 for high school students, and all students in the Cleveland metropolitan area. So down here in Cincinnati, nobody can get this. We have the Ed Choice Scholarship Program. This is probably the one that most people are familiar with. This is the one that that's probably the largest of all the programs. Again, it's about $4,600 for K-8, about $6,000 for high school students. Now, look at those numbers and keep in mind when I said right now in Columbus Public Schools, we're spending, taxpayers on the whole are spending about $20,000 per student to educate them. Meanwhile, private school scholarships are about $4,600. Now, I'll tell you, we work a lot with private Christian schools at Citizens for Community Values. Most of their K-8 tuition, you're probably looking around $5,000 to $6,000. So even at $6,000, even at $8,000, it's still a much better bargain than you're getting through the public schools. But this is one of the big concerns we have about Ed Choice today, is that it's not sustainable in the long term for schools to continue to take Ed Choice students. What they end up having to do if a student is coming in on Ed Choice, the school has to make a decision of whether they are going to float the student or whether they're going to basically deny a student on Ed Choice. They're going to stop taking Ed Choice because they can't afford to take the student anymore. It really puts schools in an untenable situation right now with how that we're funding this. We have income-based. This is Ed Choice expansion. That's income-based. I should say, Ed Choice scholarships right now. A key, the way we decide who can get an Ed Choice scholarship. Not every student is eligible for Ed Choice. You're only eligible for Ed Choice if you're in a failing school district. That's when you can get that Ed Choice scholarship. So if you're in Mason public schools, which generally perform okay, you can't get a Ed Choice scholarship because your school district is doing too well, even though maybe Mason Public Schools isn't serving your child best. We have an Ed Choice expansion, which is an income-based model. It does a little bit better, and this is actually a direction we want to see our state grow in. And then we have the Jordan Peterson Special Needs Scholarship. This is for students who are on an individual education plan, an IEP, that can get upwards of $27,000. And again, that's about what they're getting in the public school. So that is a good help for students with special needs to be able to get a higher scholarship. And same thing with the autism scholarship. So what is the direction we need to be going for school choice in Ohio? And what I have here is a picture of Phoenix, Arizona. This is where I worked for 7 years. Actually advocating for school choice on the one end for a while at Center for Arizona Policy, and then actually enforcing and implementing school choice programs in the Arizona Attorney General's office. I'm going to go back to the idea of we need to be doing money follows the child in education funding. This is what we did in Arizona that really opened up the doors for school choice. First and foremost, when money follows the child, if a child moves from a public school to a charter school, instead of that charter school getting sort of the pennies on the dollar that they're getting right now from the state, they're able to get that charter school is able to fully fund that student and be able to provide the educational needs that they need. So we have robust charter schools there that are really, I think the last time I saw it was like 3 or 4 of the top public schools in the nation are charter schools in in Arizona. Because of how they, in large part because of how they're able to get the funding they need. What we have in Arizona are 2 different big school choice programs. One was a tax credit scholarship. So this would be one where a family makes a donation to an organization, they get a dollar for dollar tax credit for that, and then that organization issued scholarships to kids to attend private schools. So this is all based off of private donations that those individuals who make the private donations get a tax break for on their state taxes. And then that organization issues scholarships for kids to attend private schools. That was a great program because those aren't tax dollars, those are donated dollars that are going to help kids attend the school of their needs. However, big program that they have in Arizona that they just passed to make every student eligible in Arizona are what's called Empowerment Scholarship Accounts, ESAs, Empowerment Scholarship Accounts. This is the future of school choice in America and in Ohio. An ESA works just like an HSA, except for education. So just like in an HSA, you get money that goes into a bank account, and then you can use that for whatever medical needs you need. How an ESA works is that the state takes 90% of the tax dollars that they would have spent on your child's education and puts it on a debit card and gives it to you and says, go educate your child. And you can use that debit card for any educational option you want. You can use it on tuition to go to private school. You can use it on tuition to go to a home online academy. You can use it for tuition to create a school with the people in your community and create a Montessori school right there. What we've seen in Arizona is so much innovation in the education space because of these ESAs, because now you have people competing to see who can create the best educational space for children to thrive in. Now, again, you can't go, and this when I talk about it, we were on the enforcement side, if somebody took that ESA debit card and went and bought an Xbox and TV, we would see it, we would flag them, we would charge them with a felony of mismanaging public funds. I will say in the 5 or 6 years that we had the program, it was a surprisingly small amount of fraud we saw with that program. I remember right before I left the Attorney General's office, I think I saw like in a few years span, there had been about $77,000 in public money misspent in the ESA programs. Now, I know $77,000 sounded a lot like a lot to you and me, but imagine the millions, the billions we spend on education, and imagine how much of that is misspent every day. And a lot of that money we were able to recoup from individuals who we, quite honestly, prosecuted. So for Ohio, where Citizens for Community Values would like to see us move, and where a lot of folks like the Koch Institute, folks like Americans for Prosperity, Heritage Foundation, where a lot of us want to see us move is to this ESA model. But we can't move to the ESA model right now because the ESA model depends on funding students instead of funding districts. Right now, if we did 90% of state funds that go to a child's education, it would be an infinitesimal amount, an amount that's not large enough to help fund to actually give the child a meaningful scholarship, a meaningful tuition coverage, because of how we go about calculating the money for the child. Until we fix that, we can't get true school choice here. We can't get the competitive environment that's needed to deal with the issues that we see in public schools, both in terms of outcome, but also in terms of curriculum, whether it's Common Core, whether it's the things that we see going on with transgenderism and sexuality in elementary schools. We can't fundamentally deal with these problems until we deal with the core funding issue. So I talked about, they had robust charter schools, they had the tuition tax credits and empowerment scholarship accounts. So last thing here I'm going to talk about in terms of what's actually going on in Ohio today to actually deal with school choice. I will say there was a lot of conversation happening. Let's take we got a question here. Go ahead and we'll take that question before I get into sort of the last. This is actual legislation we're dealing with today on school choice. Yes, sir.
Coming back to Arizona, was
Yeah.
there, and I guess it's related to this, was it income related?
No. So with the ESAs, that's a great question. When we first introduced ESAs in Arizona, it wasn't, and it was actually my first legislative session in Arizona, so that would have been 2010. What we did there was we didn't roll it out and say every child is now eligible to an ESA. We did an incremental rollout so we could kind of fine tune the program. Honestly, it gets to the point about issue 1 where we said it's locked into the state constitution, you can't tweak it. What we did with this ESA is because it's such a massive program, it's such a massive shift of how we go about doing education. You want to introduce it small and then adjust it and tweak it and learn all those types of things. So we introduced it first for low-income families, and then for kids in failing schools, and then for kids who have parents in the military. And we basically, over about 4 or 5 years, we expanded. My last year there, 2016, they passed a universal law. Actually, they just passed it in 2017. So it was right after I left. They passed a law saying ESAs are now eligible for every student. They capped it to say, like, just especially for those first few years, you didn't want to have a situation where there's this mad dash in and the system wasn't able to keep up with them. But it was for every student, they have the opportunity to access an ESA. Yes, sir. So the question is, do they have school districts like we have here? And the answer is yes. It's school districts, they had charter schools. I mean, in every form, they had they had sort of a school system the same way, but they just had a much more competitive environment. And then you started seeing, I'll use my church, for example. My church in Phoenix, it's one of these churches that has Sunday school classrooms that sit empty 5-6 days a week. So what did the families in the church decide to do? They decided to start an acting academy and use those 5 classrooms we had and start a school there. And now you have kids getting an education there and they're competing with other schools. And if a school district's not serving them, they can send their kid to that school. You just really saw what the market can do. Any other questions about Arizona before I just tie on this last issue of what we're doing in Ohio right now, the school choice bill? We got a microphone coming for you.
This might be unrelated somewhat, but something that always irritates me is all of the beautiful church buildings all around the state with all kinds of classrooms in them that sit empty all week. Do you see any interest in the church getting involved more with educating kids?
That's a fantastic question. And I think yes. especially as we see some of the cultural issues we see going on in schools today. You know, things about, you know, when the Obama administration mandated that biological boys have to be allowed in girls' locker rooms and sports teams and bathrooms. That's a space where you see families wanting to be able to take their kids out of schools. The problem is right now, financially, and this is one of the big myths of the left when it comes to private education in particular, is that, you know, people are getting rich off these greedy private schools that are just wanting to take taxpayer money and all those types of things. I do not know and again, we primarily work with private Christian schools. I do not know a private school that is getting rich off of anything. Like, most of these schools are scraping to get by, and a lot of them are closing down because it's not financially viable to operate. And so I think yes, you would see a lot of churches that would do like I mentioned with my church in Phoenix, that said, hey, we're going to open a school in our church that's vacant 6 days a week and be able to provide options for our families. But they're able to do that in Arizona because it's financially viable. It's really not financially viable for a lot of schools today. And if it is today, they're looking at how much the increase of cost of educating a child is going up and how the Ed Choice scholarship is not going up. The voucher programs we have in Ohio right now are not increasing with inflation. So that they're saying, hey, it might be viable today, but 5 years from now, it's not going to be viable and we're going to go under. So we have an environment that's disincentivizing that type of innovation. So what are we doing today in Ohio on school of choice? I think universally, most people, most organizations that work in school of choice, like CCV, recognize we need to do something about the core funding issue. However, dealing with that issue is a massive lift. It's something that takes a lot of political courage, because the way we go about funding public schools right now is that public schools would be able to make the claim, and I don't think it would be accurate, at least not in the macro sense, make the claim that we're taking money away from them, which, again, I think on a philosophical standpoint, it's not their money in the first place. This is taxpayer money that we should be spending on educating kids, not fueling districts. But the bottom line is we need to start moving in that way. I think everybody that works in this space would agree on that. It's something that I think is really important for the next governor to be focused on, to have the political courage. I'll tell you, Doug Ducey, the governor of Arizona, he has taken tremendous shots for his support of school choice in Arizona, and nobody has done more to advance school choice in the country than Doug Ducey as the governor of Arizona. But it hasn't come cheap for him, and it's been a real political fight. What we are doing today is we are trying to deal with the issue of the scholarship and voucher programs we have right now. So we have House Bill 200, which basically consolidates most of those voucher programs and increases them to adjust for inflation, so that you would get $5,000 for K through 8 and $7,500 for 9 through 12. And it ties it to an income-based model instead of a failing school district model. So basically you would be eligible, every family would be eligible for a voucher up to 300% of the federal poverty level. So if your family income is 300% of the federal poverty level, you could get an Ed Choice scholarship. Again, this isn't perfect because we wouldn't have not every family is going to have access to this. However, it is a step in the right direction because it's going to give more families the opportunity to get on the voucher programs. And this is what it's going to take to really move school choices. We need families demanding this. We need people demanding this. How many of you, I've been laughing at this. I think there's a good analogy here. How many of you remember those, have you seen those scooters that just kind of showed up in Cincinnati one day, those electric scooters that showed up? I was talking with some people about it, and they said, it's so weird that they just came and dropped these scooters in on these cities and didn't go to the cities first before they brought them in to get approval for all this. Well, and I said, well, of course they did it like that, because if they would have gone to the cities first and said, hey, we want to come here, they would have said, well, we're going to demand this, and this from you, and we need this much money and all these types of things. And they would have had no community support behind them because nobody would have known what they were. Nobody would have gotten what they are. I will just say, I've written these things. They're actually a lot of fun. And I know they could be a little bit of a pain in the butt to some people. And there's reasonable regulation that could pass, but they were If they just went to the city councils first and tried to negotiate on this, there would have been no public support for bringing those things there. But now that they've come here, people have seen them, now they have support and leverage to argue with the city council. Again, I don't want to debate that whole idea, but that core, right, exactly. It's how free enterprise, I think you're absolutely right. It's how free enterprise works. It's this same principle with school choice, is that this program would, while it's not the ideal system, it would get more kids in the system. It would get more kids on vouchers that would be able to attend the school of their choice. And the more families we can get into these systems, the more people can see, hey, this is a great way of going about educating children, and we need more of this. We need to expand this. We need to increase these types of programs. And it's going to take that kind of political capital to really take this on. Let's see here. The last thing I want to tie on here before we take questions from everyone here is, what are we doing at CCV to advance this? And this is where I want to ask you all for your help. We just launched this year the Ohio Christian Education Network. I was thrilled about this. This was an idea we've been kicking around, and literally we launched this summer, and we've already had 20 schools sign up and join us. And the idea behind this is simple, is that if Christian schools can unite behind 4 core principles, they could join in. And we want to build a body of Christian schools that are willing to come down and advocate for school choice and bring lawmakers out to their schools to see how great these schools are doing and show them the difference that it makes. That's one of the things that the public schools and the teachers unions do so well, is they show up, they get involved, they contact their lawmakers. We need private schools and charter school families and home educated families to do the exact same thing. So for those of you that would want to learn more, by all means, sign up with us. We have a sign up sheet in the back, Citizens for Community Values, or the Ohio Christian Education Network. I'd also encourage you to check out the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, Buckeye Institute, which is a local group here. Actually, I have Greg Lawson coming to speak about Russia. I don't know how Russia and the Buckeye Institute lined up. I just know Greg likes to talk about Russia. And the Fordham Institute, which is also based here in Ohio. These are phenomenal organizations that do great work on the school choice issue. And they have a lot of there's just so much great research and data out there on what's going on here in the country and in Ohio on the education front. So with that, I want to open it up to questions. Any more questions that you have, and happy to have a discussion with you all on the issue. Yes, sir. And please wait for the microphone to come around before you ask your question.
Yeah, HB 200, based on what I thought I was hearing you say, you would probably be against HB 200.
No,
because you're trying to get to the point where every child is getting the same amount of money, whereas HB 200 is driving it more toward a based on income.
No, what we would say with HB 200, it's very similar. Honestly, we work a lot on the abortion issue. And so with the abortion issue, we would like to see abortion completely banned. But we can't ban abortion tomorrow. There's not the political will to get it done. What we could do is we could do a 20-week ban. And so we supported a 20-week ban to do that. Now we're supporting the heartbeat bill to basically ban abortion at 6 weeks. And so what we work on is say, hey, this isn't perfect, but this is a better step in the right direction than where we are today. And so with House Bill 200, we support House Bill 200 because while it doesn't get us to perfectly where we need to be, it is better than where we are today. And this is how it worked in Arizona, which was we started small and we grew and we grew and we grew. And eventually we got to a place where we could go to universal. But we needed to build up the political will and show that the programs work before we could get there.
Yeah, but it would seem to me that where you'd really want to go is in the opposite direction to show that there's more schools that are failing. I mean, in fact.
How so?
Well, I mean, you show the data, heritage data, that basically shows we're not doing anything. We're not improving. And there's lots of data that shows we're failing relative to other countries. So what's really going on here is we have a lot, the percentage of our students that are failing, if you will, on a global competitive basis. That's what you really want to drive for.
Right. So maybe we're talking past each other here. So I'll do my best to answer it. And if this doesn't get it, you and I can chat offline here. Those stats that I showed earlier on failing, that's based on public schools. So where are the public schools today? What HB 200 would do would expand the number of students eligible for vouchers to be able to go to private schools. And what our argument is the more children that we can get to have vouchers to be able to go into private schools, the more competition we can create to force public schools to compete better and get those scores up and earn the money that's coming their way. So that's our, again, where House Bill 200 isn't the ideal situation. It's better than where we are today. And this to me is policymaking at its core, which is if you can't, just because you can't get everything doesn't mean you can't get something. And in time you can get there. Yes, sir.
In the Christian schools, I'm assuming they're going to be allowed to have prayer and Pledge of Allegiance in those schools too.
Yes, sir.
In your opinion, what would it take to bring back prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance to our public schools and help maybe over the next 2 or 3 generations reverse the moral decline that we've seen in our schools and families today?
Yeah.
Do you think that would be a start?
You know, quite honestly, I do think, you know, if we started prayer in public schools, you know, sort of principal sponsored or administrative sponsored prayers tomorrow, but everything else stayed the same, I don't think it would have a massive impact. The reality is right now is that the public schools are allowed to get away with the moral decay that you're talking about, because basically at the end of the day, the public school administrators can look at kids and say, or look at families and say, what are you going to do about it? You got to send your kid here. And sadly, that's the state of affairs. Until there is real pressure on the public schools to perform and quite honestly knock some of this crazy stuff off, you know, you're not going to see the change. I'll tell you, one of the big issues we're dealing with right now at Citizens for Community Values is that the ACLU and the National Education Association have issued guidance to Ohio public schools and all American public schools that says if a child comes forward and tells a teacher that they think they're gender dysphoric, that they are transgender, the school is not supposed to tell the parents and allow the child to socially transition. So allow Billy to be in school and go by Susie. And I know of instances of this happening in Ohio public schools and good public schools that folks would be surprised to know about. But at the end of the day, a lot of those families don't have any other option but to send their kid there. And so I think absolutely right. We are concerned about the moral decay we see going on culturally. But it's one of the reasons why I think the Christian movement and the free market movement need to stand closely together, is because a lot of the issues we see, especially in government-sponsored sort of morality issues, has to do with the fact that the government's spending money on it and there's no competitive forces or free market forces to sort of deal with it. So the market doesn't solve anything, but it's everything, but it does solve some things. Any other questions? We got 2 more here. Jay, are we good on time, or do we need to, if we need to wrap, we can, or? Okay, we'll do these with 2 more.
Aaron, I had a question about charter school performance.
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with any locally based charter schools that are excelling academically? Because I'm not, and I ask this as a person who supports charter schools, and for watching TV news programs, I'm familiar with some some outstanding out-of-state charter schools in Houston and Chicago and other places. But are you familiar with any local excellent schools?
So no, but quite honestly, I'm not incredibly familiar generally with the Cincinnati charter school. So that doesn't mean, I don't want to suggest that there aren't any. What I will, I'll go back to an earlier statement. This is a broader statement, is that because of the way we go about, and I know of a lot of efforts right now in Ohio to bring the top performing charter schools to Ohio. But for a lot of those schools, a lot of those conversations, they're starting, and we need to find donors to drop tens of millions of dollars here in order to make this work. And that's just unsustainable. That's not a model that can be replicated on a broad term. So until we start funding education in a better way, in a more direct way, we're not going to get those top performing charter schools. That's not to say we don't have some good performing charter schools, but they're not doing as well as you see in other places because we can't fund them the way we need to. One more, here we go. Got a microphone coming.
from what you've been talking about, teachers in charter schools have a little bit more latitude regarding what they teach.
Right.
Now, do they have to follow do the kids have to, are they subjected to the same Ohio graduation tests in the same, like at the 3rd grade, the 5th grade, the 7th grade? I mean, I see those tests, teaching to those tests is the exact opposite of education. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's destruction of education. So, but the second question, are the charter schools allowed to operate without unions in the school?
Without what's that?
Without the teachers union in the school, because one of the things, about 80% of school cost is personnel costs.
Yeah.
And the unions are desperate to keep the rate high.
For sure. So on testing, yes, there are still testing requirements in charter schools. This is one of the big core principles of the Ohio Christian Education Network when it comes to voucher programs, is we want to see voucher programs come with no strings attached, including testing requirements. Because to your point, when you start tacking testing requirements onto voucher programs, to say basically if your kid gets this voucher or this ESA, they have to pass these tests, inevitably that school is going to start teaching to that test, and then all of a sudden you see the state controlling curriculum, which gets to my point about that's not true choice. That's not true school choice. Questions about teacher unions. So charter schools have more flexibility in hiring, but not complete flexibility. So you take the Great Hearts Academies in Arizona and Texas right now. These schools are some of the top performing charter schools in the nation. They don't require their teachers be certified, be certified educators, but their kids are getting better test scores and better educated than many kids in public schools. Because what they're looking at is they're saying, hey, can you teach this? Not does somebody give you a piece of paper. That's not saying that it's not worthwhile to get educated, for someone to get a teaching degree or a teaching certificate. But this is one of the big benefits of charter schools in Arizona. And another reason why some of these schools aren't coming to Ohio right now is because of some of the regulation we still have on these charter schools. Jay, is there any online questions before we wrap here? Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to hang out. If you guys want voter guides, by all means, we have some in the back, and I just appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Aaron. He gave us a lot of good information, a lot of good questions tonight. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you of a few classes we have coming up. Thursday night is going to be at the Sharonville VFW. That's mental health wellness for veterans. You do not need to be a veteran to come to that class and benefit from it. I'm encouraging everyone to come because you may know somebody that needs it and they don't know that they need help. So if you can turn out for that class, we'd sure appreciate it. Also next Tuesday on the 16th, we have the Silver Diva class. This is your opportunity to make your own piece of jewelry. It's stamping your jewelry, personalizing it for yourself. I've never done it, so it sounds like it's going to be really interesting. And then Thursday, October the 18th, which is next week, is the class that Aaron mentioned with Greg Glosson being here. And it's going to be on Russia. So with all we hear about Russia in the news, it should be a really good class. So hope you'll sign up for some of these. Have a safe trip home, and thank you for coming tonight.